The night before Christmas and all through the house is something much scarier than a mouse.
You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my Wicked Winter series. I'm Brooke Makenna, but today's video is about the Christmas Eve party murders. Now, Christmas Eve is supposed to be a magical evening where you're hanging around with your family, where the kids are getting all giddy for what Santa's gonna bring them the next morning. It just sucks that some people who don't feel the same way want to take advantage of the ones who do. By the way, I am posting 31 days of continuous content for Wicked Winter this December, so if you do enjoy content like this, make sure you are subscribed with the post notification bell on so you don't miss an upload. And if you want to make me happy, you could thumbs this up or leave a nice comment, and I would love you forever. So let's get back to the story. So it was December 24th, or Christmas Eve of 2008 in Covina, which is a suburb in Los Angeles, California. It's thought to be a very low crime, peaceful community where during Christmas they decorate the palm trees, they have a Christmas parade. Even though it's still hot outside, they still make do of what they can and have a Christmas there. But this is also where the Ortega family lived. At 1129 Knollcrest Drive lived Joseph and Alice Ortega, who were 80 years old and 70 years old and had been married for 53 years. They were living there by themselves because their children had grown up, but they were described as very hardworking and loving. Joseph had a painting business all of his own that he had actually retired from, and Alice was thought to be the perfect grandma who always made sure you were never hungry. But that Christmas Eve, they invited all of their 5 children over to celebrate with them. And the eldest in the Ortega family was 51-year-old James, then 49-year-old Charles, then 46-year-old Alicia, then Leticia, and 43-year-old Sylvia. These kids were the most respectful kids since they were tiny kids. When you walked in the door, no matter who you were, if you walked in the door, they would come up, give you a kiss, welcome you in, and when you left, they made sure to tell you goodbye, give you a goodbye hug. They were just taught to be the most kind individuals ever. But this Ortega family loved Christmas time, especially Joseph and Alice. They wanted all of their family to be together, but not just their family. They invited people from their community, friends, anybody who wanted to come really was allowed to come over to their house and celebrate with them. One of the biggest things they did during Christmas Eve celebrations was that they would go to the dining room, all of the adults, to play a game of Texas Hold'em. They would get all rowdy, they would get competitive. It was just a good time. And the kids would be in the back playing video games. The teenagers would kind of be upstairs on computers, hanging out. And it was just a very good Christmas. But on this night in 2008, the doorbell rang, and shortly after that, 911 began receiving calls. And one of the partygoers ran to a neighbor's house to call as well. One call said, "Come immediately, they're burning someone's house down." Another said they heard shooting coming from the house. And the police were immediately dispatched, but they had no idea that it was worse than they expected. When they arrived, it was chaos, and the lieutenant said to describe it as apocalyptic would be accurate. This fire was soaring 40 to 50 feet, and it took 80 firefighters an hour and a half to put it out. But once they put it out, they had no idea what they would find inside, and they had to wait a while because there was just a fire. It needed to be safe before they could go in and look. They knew that at the party there had been around 25 to 30 guests, and most of them luckily had survived and gotten out. There were 3 that they knew were injured, which was an 8-year-old girl who was the Ortega's grandchild who was shot in the face. Then there was a 16-year-old woman who was shot in the back, and then an older woman who broke her ankle jumping from the 2nd-story window. The Ortega parents, Joseph and Alice, were missing, as well as their kids, except for Leticia. Leticia was actually fine, and the 8-year-old girl who was shot in the face was her daughter, and they had already headed to the hospital to deal with her daughter when the police began to search the home. 9 bodies were found inside, and they had to wait to use dental and medical records to identify them because they were so badly burnt in the fire. 2 of them were Joseph and Alice. Alice had been shot in the abdomen, and Joseph had multiple gunshot wounds. Their children, besides Letitia, were found as well. Sylvia had a gunshot wound, as well as Charles, and Charles had a wife named Sherry Lynn who was also in there and had a gunshot wound herself. And their son James was also in there with his wife Teresa, and they had died of gunshot wounds and the fire, and Ortega's daughter Alicia was as well. Her son was also in there, named Michael, and he died from the fire. 9 bodies in total, all in the Ortega family. Then witnesses and survivors began telling the police what had happened, what they remembered. They said at about 11:30 p.m. the doorbell rang, and the 8-year-old girl began shouting, "Santa Claus, Santa Claus," because the Ortegas would normally bring in a Santa to just have a little bit more festivity. But when they opened the door, this Santa had a 9mm semi-automatic gun and a gift in his hand, and he shot the 8-year-old in the face. He then began shooting at the Ortega boys, Charles and Joseph, who fell on the floor. The Ortega daughters jumped under the table with their parents, but the only one that would survive would be Letitia. Sylvia and her parents were shot execution style in front of the whole family. It is said that when he arrived, a lot of the adults were up front because people were beginning to leave, so they were all gathering and saying goodbye. Charles and Joseph, who were on the floor, tried getting up to stop him from going any farther, but they were so wounded by this point that they couldn't. People were screaming, "Run, run," and running everywhere, and Letitia was on the phone with 911 saying, "I heard the shots, everyone started panicking and running, and we all dove under the dining table." And after that, she ran out of the house with her cousin because they had seen Letitia's 8-year-old daughter, who had been shot in the face, kind of wobbling out of the house, but she was still alive. By this point, the surviving adults were grabbing the children from the back and trying to get them out of the house as quickly as possible, but they had no idea that at this point, this Santa Claus man was going over to the gift he brought and opening it to bring out a homemade flamethrower to spray 18 gallons of gasoline in the home. But somewhere in the house was an open flame that he didn't plan for, which caused an explosion and burned him. But if they could identify all of the bodies inside as family members who were already at the party, then who had barged in and done this? And how did he get away? The police were searching and trying to find any clues when they had neighbors come to them with a tip that at 11:45 they were driving into the cul-de-sac when they saw a car driving out. And they had a description. An APB was immediately put out, and it led them to a man named Bruce Jeffrey Pardo. And when they looked into him, they found that he had a very strong connection to this family. He was Sylvia Ortega's ex-husband, and the police thought they had found their killer. Except that same night, his brother Brad Pardo had called 911 because he had arrived home from a Christmas party to go into his house and find his own brother, Bruce Pardo, in a pool of his own blood. The police arrived to find a bullet in Bruce's head and a 9mm pistol in his lap and a second one on the floor. But there was also a bullet hole in the ceiling that made them question if there was a second shooter. But Bruce and Sylvia had divorced just 6 days before the murders. And the day after, on Christmas Day, Letitia, the only surviving sibling of the Ortegas, was talked to about this, was questioned, and she said that she actually thought she knew who the killer was because somebody screamed out, "It's Bruce," when all of this was happening, and she looked and it was him. They found Bruce's car with thousands of rounds of ammunition as well as a Santa suit, but it was rigged to explode black powder when the Santa suit was removed. They did an autopsy on Bruce that proved that it was suicide that killed him, and he also had horrible third-degree burns on his hands and arms, and there was fabric that was red and white melted to his legs from the Santa suit. But inside his legs was a girdle with $17,000 in cash. They searched his house and found 5 empty boxes for semi-automatic handguns, as well as 2 shotguns and a container of gasoline. It was said that this was a virtual bomb factory, and on his computer they found plans for this entire murder that had been planned months ago. Then a man called about a mysterious car in front of his home in Pasadena. When they ran the plates, they found that it had been rented to Bruce Pardo himself. And inside they found essentials like clothing, a computer, water, food, and maps of the US and Mexico inside. 500 feet from the car was the home of Sylvia's divorce attorney, which led them to believe he was going to flee to Mexico after doing all of this, but first he was going to take out the man who took his wife, or who he believed took his wife from him, the divorce attorney. They had speculated he was either going to take this car to Mexico or fly to Canada, because they found he had bought a plane ticket for Air Canada, but then it was found that that plane ticket was actually going to Illinois, and he had called a high school friend to see if he could visit him for a while. This was all before the murders even began. He had visited the same friend a few months before and had called a few days before to ask if he could come again. But the police also thought that could be a diversion from the truth of him actually driving away to Mexico. But the police strongly believed that divorce was this motive. Bruce and Sylvia had met in 2004, married in January 2006, and divorced 2 years later. They had lots of complications in their marriage, you could say. Bruce didn't want to join a bank account with Sylvia and told her she was to pay for everything for her 3 kids from previous relationships. He also at one point had a knee injury which caused him to be a hermit, not shower, be in a bad mood all the time, and this combined was believed to be why they divorced. In June of 2008, he was actually ordered to pay $1,785 in spousal support, but it was waived after he lost his job at ITT Electronic Systems. He was an electrical engineer who was making pretty good money, but it was found he was actually billing clients for time that he wasn't working, and so they fired him. In the divorce settlement, he was ordered to pay $10,000 to Sylvia, and she got to keep the wedding ring and the dog. He had no history of any criminal behavior and no violence, but he did say some strange things during the whole divorce proceedings. He would say things like Sylvia was taking him for a cleaning and that she was staying at her parents' house, didn't have to pay rent, and spending all the money on luxury things like cars, gambling trips, fine meals, golfing lessons, trips. And Bruce at this point was so unstable in the mind that he even knew his mother was going to be at the Ortega family Christmas party, and he didn't care because he believed she sided with Sylvia in the divorce. But luckily she stayed home that evening because she was sick. And it was also found that Bruce had a child with his previous relationship before Sylvia. Her name was Elena, and they had a child that Sylvia had no idea about until he started having to pay for medical bills for this boy. Because when the baby was just 13 months old, Elena went out to get groceries and Bruce was home with the baby. But when she came home, this baby was nowhere to be found, and she found him outside drowning in the pool. He went to the hospital and he survived, but he was in a vegetative state for the rest of his life and wheelchair bound. And 6 months later, Bruce left them and didn't pay a single thing. It was said the divorce shattered Bruce Pardo. It became an obsession, and Bruce began to plot ways to get back at Sylvia. I think he decided he wasn't just going to kill her, but he was going to kill everything that she loved and take it, wipe it off the face of the earth. And in 2016, Leticia, the surviving member of the Ortega family, actually talked to Oprah about this entire thing. And what she said was so inspiring. She said, "I can't do anything to change what happened. I can only focus on the future. This is what he's done. Enough. I'm not going to allow you to continue to consume us with your evilness. You don't want that anger to live within you day to day and grow, just like it did with this monster." And now it's said that she is the glue that keeps the family together, keeps up family traditions, parties, everything. On Christmas Day, they go to church, and they make it a yearly thing now to head to the cemetery and see their loved ones before having dinner all together. She also took in her deceased younger sister's daughter, because in total after this murder spree, 13 children were orphaned. But Letitia makes it a priority to make sure that the children know that wasn't the real Santa, and the Santa is a nice man. And when they were in the hospital in 2008, that same day, she made sure to call friends and family and ask them to bring presents, to set up a tree, so it was still Christmas for these kids and it didn't ruin Christmas forever. They were all later sent to camps to help with their grief and anxiety, but Letitia herself still says that she struggles with anxiety and nightmares. She often encourages the children to write letters to people who have lost their loved ones, and says, "We have to keep moving in our everyday moments. There are those moments we think we've been through the worst, so this cannot break us." And Bruce's mother actually started a fundraiser to give back to these families who lost their loved ones, and she also gave all of the money that was in Bruce's girdle that was found on him. But I just thought that Letitia and how she's handled everything is the most beautiful thing to come from such a tragic situation. She could have gone down such a bad path because her entire family was taken right in front of her. But she took it and made it beautiful and made it a way to honor them and helped those kids so incredibly much. But why do you think he really did this? Do you think it was the divorce? Do you think he just always had this evilness within him and this divorce triggered it? What do you think? And why do you think he ended up taking his own life? Because he had cars, plane tickets ready to go. Was it the burns? Was it the Santa suit that meshed to his body that he knew he'd be caught in? What do you think? Do you think he freaked out at the end and regretted it? I don't think that there's a huge possibility in that, but of course there always is that option. Or do you think he knew that he wouldn't get away with it? Either way, I'm kind of angry that he didn't have to spend time for what he did, but I guess it's better that he's caught than if he were to have gotten away with it. So yeah, I know that this is a holiday themed, holiday homicide or whatever, but it is a little eerie to talk about. And there is one coming tomorrow that is actually Christmas Day themed. If you want to watch that as well, that will be up tomorrow. Make sure to thumbs up if you do want that. And yeah, so I hope this doesn't, bring down your holiday any, but I do think that it's something that happens more during the holidays because people do think more about families and are with more families, and if they're not, in the right headspace, unfortunately, stuff like this happens. And just stay safe out there and make sure to always hold your loved ones very close during this time. But anyways, don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.
All the stockings were hung on the chimney with care, in hopes that happiness would be there.